So first, I want to invite you guys to join into these conversations that we're doing. This is our very first episode of something new we're trying, calling Coffee with Friends. So we have our coffee and we have our friends, and we're going to start talking about just different topics that we're seeing going on in the world, going on around us. And I want to invite you, if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, you can email that topic, that question, whatever it is, email it to christiandiscussionroom@streamsministries.com. Christian Discussion Room at streamsministries.com. You'll see that right here on the screen. And we might bring it up in one of our episodes coming up. But for this first episode, we all kind of cut together, like, what are some things that we think would be fun to talk about? And we came up with a variety of different topics, and then we voted, like, which one is the most important. And this one, every single one of us said was a top conversation that we needed to have. How do we as Christians respond to wokeism? So, I mean, a few years ago, I was hearing people talk about woke, and I was completely out of it. I had no idea what it was. I'm like, well, I want to wake up. Like, so then I started looking into it, and I realized it's not at all what I thought. You did a little research into the history of it.
Yeah. So what I found was it started in the 1930s. It came out of the left movement in America, and it seems to be largely informed by postmodernism, where we no longer trust in a greater narrative or a greater story, as well as moral relativism. So individual truth trumps collective truth, and every individual's like preference has validity. And that sounds all really good on the surface. And what probably started off as a movement to address injustice, social wrongs, has merged into something that I would say is really, really far from its origin point.
Yeah. Oh, didn't I see something about it really being about the kind of the racial injustice in particular for the first probably 30, 40 years at least, and then it started to transform into any kind of social issue?
Yeah. I mean, it's branched off into, it was really, having these inequalities within society. Like you said, like the civil rights movement would have really aligned really closely to this originally. And now it's just branched off into what it would appear to be not just an American phenomenon, but it's a global phenomenon going on right now, where it's no longer about, the gaps of injustice. It's literally every point of view is valid and should be equally weighted regardless of its morality. That seems to be where it's ended up as far as I can see.
Yeah. And that right there is the issue.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. So, like, have you run into?
Yeah.
What's your
Well, I think
conversation
for
about
me, thinking about the history of it, and things are not always all good or all bad. That's kind of one of the things that I love about what we're going to discuss, because the origin of it was good. Yeah. I think the origin being a movement of social justice. Jesus was a social justice Jesus, right? He cared for all people who were in this place of being marginalized. So growing up here in the Dallas Metroplex, I lived in an area of Dallas that is historically like for more poor people. So we had a mix of people, right? We had Black, white, Hispanic, just culturally, it was very diverse. And living there, I feel like I was a little untouched from racism because we were so well integrated, and we were all honestly just trying to survive together in the hood, so to speak. So when I came to church, actually, that's the first time I really experienced racism. That was the first time I saw a division in people. And so the first church that I went to was probably 95% white. Ended up over time, there were a few more, people of different culture, different color. So I know it's not all a race thing, but I'm using that as an example. I feel like we wouldn't have a need for wokeism or anything with that title if we were doing the job that we should be doing in the church, if we were loving people well, if we were fighting for social justice. So what starts out good just has been tainted by the world. So when you look at the church and kind of where we, which is part of our discussion, right? What are we accountable to? Who are we accountable to? And what should this look like in the church? Well, in the church, it should look like love. Right. It should look like embracing all people. It should look like fighting for people's rights, for social justice, for women, for marginalized people, for the poor, all of that. So we need a different name in the church, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love what you said there, Charity, because I think that what started as a really beautiful thing has been tainted and twisted and now has all these different meanings. And we're looking at something that people are saying is, oh, morality doesn't matter. And if you believe it, then it's so wonderful and it's so worthy. And it's just unfortunate because I think we can see that across the board in almost any issue that it can start as a good thing and the heart can be so pure and so beautiful. And then it just gets twisted and molded over time. And what's unfortunate to me is that something that had the intent of equality and unity has actually ended up causing so much division and anger on all sides. And that's what's so unfortunate to me is, this was always meant to bring us together. And instead it's causing so much anger and riots and things that we're seeing in our nation the last few years. And I guess my heart is that the church can begin to step up and kind of be a bridge for what was it actually meant to be? And how can we bring that from a different angle of the heart of Christ and that he always fought for every individual person. So yeah, that's something that I would love to see kind of in the church's role shift more and more and how we can be that bridge.
And one of the things that really kind of caused some of the thought process, kind of the reaction that I had, the negative reaction that I had to the whole thing was just the way that it gets tied into this idea of victim. Because they're real victims, but then they're perceived victims. And actually, I have a high value for fighting for victims, like real victims. Like I want to fight for the poor. I want to fight for the oppressed. I want to fight for the orphan. I want to fight for the widow. Like this is actually pure and undefiled religion, right? That's what we're called to be as Christians. And yet once you get that idea of victim, poor me, and that becomes an identity and it becomes a way of actually taking power, of stealing power from whatever the institution, from society, from anything else. Now all of a sudden it's no longer justice, it's actually injustice. And we actually teach people to value being victims so that they can have a voice, so that they can have a value. And we celebrate people that are actually not victims, they're making bad choices. Right? So when we're talking about the issue of race, like that's clearly, I mean, there's not a choice as to what color of skin that you have when you're born, what culture you grow up, what neighborhood do you grow up in. Like there's no question that is not a choice. But once we start trying to bring in some of the other issues that have been brought in with wokeism, like the issue of the LGBTQ community, and this understanding, like, people are making choices as to their sexual expression. That's a good way of putting it. Like how they're going to express their sexuality. And those choices, they're not inherent in how they're born. Now that's one of the big issues that should probably be in a whole nother conversation.
It will be.
But it's a reality. Like this is a choice that somebody's making. And the Bible's very clear about that not being okay. That's not a victim. That's somebody that's actually created problems for themselves. And they're using somebody that has a real issue. In the 1930s, clear till today, there still is racism in America. So it's not like it's gone. But in the 1930s, people were being killed on a regular basis publicly, and it was being celebrated because they happened to be the wrong color in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like that, if that's not a justice issue, then there's not a justice issue. And now all of a sudden we're taking this and tying it into that, and it devalues the reality of the evil that was inherent in society, and then makes it this personal choice thing. And it goes back to this, whatever I want type of thing, and valuing that, which, that to me, that's the evil of wokeism, of what it's become. That it's devalued the real issues, and it's made choices a social justice issue when that's not a social justice issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it got supercharged by the sexual revolution of the 60s. So what happened was instead of it being economic issues, racial issues, now sexual identity became an equally weighted issue. So now sexual liberation, you won't suppress our sexuality, all of those things which seem to be raging against quote unquote, oppressive conservative values that came with the explosion of free love, summer of love, all of that stuff. It's become this heady mix that's come interwoven, like you were saying, like it's no longer just a clear issue, but because it's come down to this whole thing of truth is something that I personally identify and define, we can't actually separate out the issues because of the posturing of how that's worked. It's like, look, you can't say that my sexual issue is not the same as this. Like it has just as much validity as racial issues or as economic issues. And because postmodernism has thrust us into a place where there's no longer a truth, capital T. It's now little t truth, where it's defined by me, my preferences, my experiences. It's postured us in such a way where we almost seemingly can't argue with it, because now we're in this landscape of basically a philosophical wasteland of if it feels good, do it, and if you like it, go after it. So bringing in truth into that space, we're seen as archaic, judgmental, all of the things that Jesus said that they would say we are.
Yeah.
And and that's the thing, I think in our pursuit of engaging with this phenomena, the reality is if we lower the standard of who we are and what we say is truth to reach these communities, we're actually compromising who we are as the people of God. And what I found is there is a social justice movement that has come into the church, which is a social justice gospel. And what it actually does is it removes the standard of what Jesus actually said. You must become born again to even see the kingdom of God. And now it's the gospel only addresses social issues, but doesn't actually address the heart of men and women anymore. Wow. And so that's where wokeism has become attractive to people in the church, that maybe they have a passion for justice issues. Maybe they have a passion for things like, creation care. And what it's done is it's become attractive to them. Hey, come over to our way of thinking because you guys are not progressive enough in that. And so it's appealed to a very sentimental part of who we are as people. And if we don't actually measure it to truth, and that becomes our plumb line of how we engage with these issues, justice issues are a biblical issue. Yeah. These are biblical issues, but how we engage with them, I think it's not a protest thing and it's not an acceptance thing. It's somewhere in the middle of, look, I will love you as a person, but I will not approve of what you stand for.
Yes.
That's the tension that we have. And sometimes we have the protesting, and sometimes we have the full tacit approval where it's like, well, I'm just loved anyway and I can do whatever. So we've got sloppy grace, and we've got basically anger and hatred on the other end of the spectrum. The real challenge that we have, and I would love to hear anyone's thoughts on this, is how do we actually walk in the middle where we, as snatching some from fire, as James says, or others with gentleness? Like, how do we navigate that tension?
I think it's conviction with compassion. And I don't want to have just a tagline for that, but I was listening to you and I was thinking what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that over here we have conviction with anger, conviction with, and I hesitate to even use the word law because there is a moral law, but conviction with persecution. I think that's the word I'm looking for, or extreme compassion. This other side that says, you have been hurt. For the true victims, there is compassion for that. And so we have this tendency, and we have this tendency with everything. When you think about it, we have this tendency to be far over, if someone hurts my feelings, they're all bad. Well, people aren't all bad or all good, right? They're not. And so you can look at your childhood, for example, and say, this and this and this bad thing happened. Well, what was good that happened, right? In any situation, it's not all good or all bad. For the most part. Let me say that differently. Yeah, I haven't been sex trafficked or something, but you get what I'm trying to say there. And so as believers, it is finding that middle, and it is having conviction with compassion intertwined. So I had a situation recently with someone who's not a believer who I just love dearly. And I know God's heart for this person is salvation. I know God's heart for her is to know how loved she is by him. So obviously what I wanted to do was say, hey, these choices that you're making, these are leading you further from God, but that's not important to her. That's actually not what is on her radar. What's on her radar is I want to do what's going to make me feel best. I want to do, I want to live in this place where it's making me happy and blah, blah, blah. So I feel like the best way to speak truth to her is I'm not wavering in my conviction. 100%. If she says to me, hey, I'm doing this, what do you think? I would say that absolutely is not God's best for you. That's not, and are you really fulfilled? So I think it's asking deeper questions. What's the heart behind that? Why are you making that choice? What's going on? How do you feel about yourself? What does that leave you feeling about God? If we're going to have the God conversation, and then realizing too that the enemy hijacks these things. So like thinking about victims and victimization, there's this balance, right? Of really acknowledging, hey, you are a victim. You need to be heard and seen. And that needs to be acknowledged. Let's don't pretend like it's not real.
Yeah.
Versus the spirit, the victim spirit.
Yes.
Which says, I'm
That's
going to
huge.
capture your heart and I'm going to have you live. And this is your identity and you're going to wear it.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. Do I wear it? Do I acknowledge it? It's a coat in my closet that happened at some point. I don't know where that analogy came from. Whatever.
What?
Some point was this on me? Yes, but I don't wear that. I don't,
Right.
That's not who I am. And so how can we help people? How can we walk out in that truth ourselves so that we're not enraptured by the victim spirit? Because if we are carrying it, guess what happens? We connect really quickly,
Misery
right?
loves
It's familiar.
company.
We have that familiar spirit. And then how do we say, yes, this happened. This is true.
Yeah.
But that's not your identity. Your identity is in Christ.
Yeah. I love that conviction with compassion.
Yeah.
Right. It's so important. So I've got a question for you. I'm
Yes.
thinking through. So you've been doing a lot of kind of theological studies. So this whole area, one of the wrong responses, like Westboro Baptist Church, right? Their website, God Hates Fags. And they've been known for picketing and and they're trying to, in their own mind, like I've read a couple of the sermons that they preach. I mean, they're trying to hold on to a standard of righteousness. How do we avoid that in our thinking biblically about this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the pitfall that a lot of believers fall into historically, that we've fallen into, is this idea of, I want to stand up for my belief system, this idea of righteousness and wanting to take a stand for God and, oh, I'm so on fire for Jesus. And that means that I have to stand in the middle of this war when I know what's right, okay? What ends up happening is we get so on fire for righteousness and holiness that we completely neglect the very character of Christ, of grace and compassion and love. And I really love what you were saying, Daniel, because it's so important that we don't forget that grace always has to be accompanied by truth, and truth always has to be accompanied by grace. If we just stand on a pulpit and we are yelling at somebody about what is true, that is not going to do anything. It's just not. Historically, we see that more and more young people are pulling away from the church because they don't want to be told that homosexuality is wrong. They want to be told, hey, you know what? There's a God who created you and loves you so much that he has something for you so much better than what you can even fathom right now. And if you'll just lean in, he'll show you that. But when we are yelling, when we're angry, when we're making signs, and we have a heart of justice, of righteousness, what we're actually communicating is the very Pharisee-like stance on the Bible of, this is anger of like the holy fire of God. And, this is what righteousness is. And all of that is true. Like homosexuality is wrong. The Bible's very clear on that. But so is being judgmental and hateful and angry and violent. So we are sinning just as much when we're yelling and we're screaming and we're throwing things at these children of God just because they're walking in sin. Well, all of us have walked in sin. All of us will continue to have times where we walk in sin. And, we probably sin multiple times a day without even meaning to because we're humans and that's why we need the Lord. And so it saddens me, especially theologically, because I can see the heart behind what they're doing and it's so valid, but it's so misguided at the same time. And so I think the challenge for the modern church is understanding that loving the person does not mean condoning the action. And this was actually something that I had a conversation with someone the other day, and I thought was so interesting to me. I always say that Starbucks is my number one ministry, which I know is so
Coffee with
countercultural.
friends. Come on.
So countercultural. And a lot of people, have boycotted Starbucks because of their belief system. I'm of the mindset that if somebody makes a hard stand against the Bible, that's the place that needs more believers, because they're so broken that obviously there is a hole for Christ's love to fill. And so in Starbucks drive-thru, I have had the most incredible conversations by just being kind to people. And it opens a door, and we can talk about truth and healing and ministry in ways that I never would have been able to talk to them about if I had gone, oh, you're a guy and you're talking to me about nail art? Well, no. Oh, I'm sorry they don't let you do your nails. Let's keep talking. Do I think you should do your nails? No. But I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to be a human with you in this moment. And that's going to open your heart so then we can actually have the truth conversation instead of just coming at you with that first. So,
Good.
Yeah. So good. So good. So, I mean, this one of the things, and just in hearing this part of the conversation, I keep on thinking about Jesus's words about don't throw your pearls before swine. Like, I think that sometimes in our response to wokeism, we're trying to fight battles that somebody else isn't actually engaging with us in, and we're not doing any good. And instead of trying to figure out how to change people that are not part of the church, how can we figure out how to make our lives and ourselves so attractive that people want to figure out how to be a part of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Like if we were going to actually live out the life of Christ, and if we were living out love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, the fruit of the Spirit, if that was our norm, all of a sudden that becomes the antithesis to the works of the flesh, which is the divisions, the slander, right? The cancel culture, the homosexuality, the orgies, the drunkenness, the parties, like that whole thing. It's the opposite. It's the answer. And too many times we're trying to tell people not to do one thing without giving them a valid option that's beautiful.
that's so good.
And trying to find a way of actually enjoying the life that we've been given, right? So we've got to deal with our own heart and our own bitterness at God, because he said, well, you shouldn't do this, but I want to do this. Well, no, wait a second. I'm thinking wrong. I'm in deception because I want to do that. When we deal with that, and then we don't have to be so militant in helping people, and we will change the direction, because Jesus was he was so kind to sinners. Like he went to the parties where there were tax collectors and prostitutes. They were both in the same party for a reason. One of them had enough money to pay the other, right? And those are the parties that Jesus was showing up in. But he gets to the religious house, and then he's like, "You're a whitewashed tomb. You guys, I mean, you're cleaning the outside of the cup, but the inside, I mean, who would drink that?" And it's that complete difference of the way that we deal with it. And in the church, let's spend more time trying to deal with that religious mindset that's trying to figure out how to change sinners' behavior instead of trying to figure out how to change sinners.
That's so good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look at Jesus spent 33 and a half years in Roman occupied territory, being oppressed with an invading force that was holding down their country. And for 3.5 years of ministry, he never addressed them, not even once.
No.
What did he do? He addressed the Rome that was in every man's heart.
Yeah.
So in terms of engaging with what's going on, I mean, there's a whole other prophetic narrative that I could throw out to ask questions about. But in the context, it's easier to engage with external dynamics than actually engage with the internal dynamic that, because, when Jesus said about the speck and the log, what I have found more often than not is the reason why I can recognize a speck is it's made of the same substance of the log that's in my eye.
Yes.
And so sometimes when we get a response to something, not necessarily wokeism, but just in general, it's because it intimately affects us, meaning we haven't necessarily dealt with the pride that we're seeing in somebody else or the arrogance that's over there. And we want to engage in these grand social narratives. But what we're doing is we're expecting non-believers to behave like Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think what we actually need to do is begin to expect believers to act like Jesus.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Amen.
that's the shift. I mean, yes, we need to engage with social issues. We need the William Wilberforces of our day who actually engage with bigger injustices. But I think the real determining factor is what we're in the middle of. We're in the middle of a one world movement unifying. Some of the things that we try to unify around, what appears to be good is going to end up to turn out to be evil. And it's that prophetic narrative right now where it's like, look, wokeism is trying to bring everybody together under one banner. And what it's actually really doing is it's setting us up to be a united people, which seems like a good thing in theory.
Yeah.
But when Jesus said, when they say to you, peace, peace, Paul actually said that. When they're saying to you, peace, peace, book it, get out. I think part of the narrative that's going on right now is I think that there's also a prophetic dynamic at play in the midst of what's going on, because when it talks about the spirit of Antichrist, anti doesn't necessarily mean against. The Greek word can also be translated as in the place of. So there is a Jesus being presented in the middle of this woke movement, which actually is representing a different Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
By and large.
Yeah, definitely. So we respond with conviction. Like we hold on to the standard of righteousness. We deal with ourselves, not with everybody else. We realize that this is a bigger issue. We hold those convictions with compassion, and we keep it about Jesus. We keep it about that life. And if we do that, like we'll be able to present something that's actually beautiful enough that people are going to want to be a part of it. Like that sounds to me like a good way to respond to it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Awesome.